The house at the end of Hallow Lane. It was said that the house at the end of Hallow Lane had a mind of its own. The locals called it the living house, a place where time seemed to warp and twist, and where people went in but rarely came out. Stories of its shifting halls and ghostly inhabitants had been whispered around campfires for years, but no one had lived there for decades. That is, until Lily moved in. Lily had never been one to believe in ghost stories. After losing her job in the city, she needed a fresh start, and the old house had come at a price she couldn't resist. It was bigger than anything she could have afforded otherwise, and though it was in disrepair, she saw it as a project, a new beginning. The town's warnings didn't deter her. To her, it was just another old, creaky house that needed a little love. The first few days passed without incident. Lily spent her time cleaning and making the place livable. It was exhausting work, but she enjoyed the solitude. Hallow Lane was far from town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow up all sound. The house itself was old and filled with hidden nooks and crannies, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. Every once in a while, she thought she heard faint footsteps coming from the upstairs rooms, but she brushed it off as the house settling. Then, one evening, something changed. It had been a long day of scrubbing and dusting, and Lily was relaxing in the living room with a cup of tea when she noticed something odd. The doorway to the hall seemed different. It was wider than she remembered, and the wallpaper, which had been yellow and peeling, now looked fresher, cleaner. She frowned, setting her cup down and walking over to inspect it. Had she just not noticed before? Maybe she was more tired than she thought. She turned to head back to the living room, but froze. The living room was gone. In its place was a long, narrow hallway, stretching far beyond where the living room should have been. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, a dim light flickering from the room beyond. Lily's heart raced. This wasn't possible. She had just been sitting in the living room. Panic set in as she backed away, her eyes darting around. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air growing thick and heavy. She turned and ran back towards the front door, but as she reached for the handle, it wasn't there. The door was gone, replaced by another hallway that twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Breathing hard, Lily tried to calm herself. This couldn't be real. She must be hallucinating. Maybe she was overtired, dehydrated. She needed to find her way back to the stairs, to get to the second floor where her bedroom was. Maybe everything would be normal upstairs. But the house had other plans. As she moved through the hallways, they shifted around her. Rooms appeared and disappeared. One moment, she'd find herself in what seemed like the dining room, but the next, the walls would stretch and twist, pulling her into a space that hadn't existed a second before. The house was alive, changing itself around her, trapping her within its maze-like corridors. And then she started hearing them, the voices. At first they were faint, little more than whispers carried on the air. But as the night wore on, they grew louder, clearer. They called her name over and over, sometimes soft, sometimes pleading, sometimes sharp and angry. Lily! She spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one. The voices echoed from everywhere and nowhere, filling her mind. Her pulse quickened as her fear deepened. The house was playing with her, toying with her panic. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time no longer made sense in the house. Every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into its shifting, labyrinthine halls. Her legs ached, her throat was dry, and her head pounded with fear and confusion. Then she saw it. A door. It was different from the others, larger and made of dark wood, with a strange, ornate symbol carved into it. Something about it felt wrong, but she couldn't resist. This was the first door that hadn't disappeared or changed the moment she reached for it. Desperation overtook her, and she grabbed the handle, twisting it open. The room beyond was small, dimly lit by a single candle that flickered on a table in the center. But it wasn't the candle that drew her attention. It was the figure seated at the table, their back turned to her. Lily's breath hitched in her throat as the figure slowly turned. It was an old woman, her skin pale and drawn tight over her bones, her eyes sunken deep into her skull. She smiled at Lily, a twisted, eerie grin that sent chills down her spine. The woman's lips moved, but her voice came from all around Lily, like the house itself was speaking. "You shouldn't have come here, child." Lily stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. Who are you?" The old woman's smile widened. "This house. It's hungry. Always hungry." Lily's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I just wanted to live here," she stammered. "I didn't know." The woman cackled, the sound harsh and grating. "The house chooses who stays, and it's chosen you." Suddenly, the walls of the room began to close in, the floor shifting beneath her feet. The air grew colder, and Lily felt something wrap around her ankles, roots, dark and gnarled, creeping up from the floorboards. She tried to pull away, but they held fast, tightening with every second. The old woman stood, her form dissolving into shadow as she moved closer. "You'll feed the house, just like the others. You'll become part of it." Lily's screams echoed through the halls, but no one was there to hear them. The roots pulled her down, deeper into the floor, the house devouring her piece by piece. The last thing she saw was the old woman's face, twisted in a grotesque smile, as the darkness swallowed her whole. And then there was silence. Days later, the townspeople noticed that Lily had stopped coming into town. No one dared go to the house at the end of Hallow Lane, but they knew. The house had claimed another, and it was always hungry for more. The Shadow in the Well. The small village of Briar Hollow had many legends, but none as feared as the tale of the old stone well on the outskirts of town. It was said to be cursed, a place where people vanished, never to be seen again. The well sat forgotten at the edge of the woods, its stones crumbling, the rope that once held the bucket frayed and rotting. Villagers would warn their children to stay away, to never peer into its depths. But, as with all dark tales, not everyone believed. Megan didn't believe. She had just moved to Briar Hollow, a city girl who scoffed at small-town superstitions. She had taken a job as a teacher in the local school and was renting a small cottage on the edge of the village, close to the woods where the well stood. The villagers had warned her repeatedly, but she found the warnings quaint, if not a little amusing. A cursed well? How could people still believe such nonsense? It was a cool autumn evening when Megan decided to explore the woods near her cottage. The air was crisp, the leaves crunched beneath her feet, and the setting sun bathed the forest in a soft golden glow. As she wandered deeper into the woods, she found herself near the infamous well. It was smaller than she had imagined, barely visible under a tangle of vines and overgrown weeds. Smirking to herself, she approached the well, her curiosity piqued. The villagers had said that at night, shadows danced around the well, and if you looked into its depths, something might look back. Ridiculous, she thought. Megan brushed away the vines and peered into the well. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. She squinted, leaning in a little closer, but still, nothing. A soft wind stirred the leaves around her, and for a moment, she thought she heard a faint whisper rising from the well's depths. She shook her head, laughing at herself. Then, she saw it. A shadow, faint at first, but as she watched, it grew more distinct, more solid. It moved slowly, shifting and writhing as though it were alive. Megan blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there was something down there. Suddenly, A voice, soft and raspy, drifted up from the well. "Help! Me!" Megan gasped, stumbling back from the well. Her heart raced as she looked around, expecting to see someone, anyone, nearby. But she was alone. The voice came again, weak and pitiful. "Please, help me." Against every instinct screaming in her mind to run, Megan stepped closer to the well. "Who's down there?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was a long silence. Then the voice replied, "I've been trapped for so long. Please, help me. I'm so cold." Megan's stomach twisted. Could someone have fallen into the well? How long had they been down there? She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the well. The beam of light barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only rough stones and damp earth. The voice came again, softer now. "Please, don't leave me here." Megan swallowed hard. She knew it was a bad idea, but the voice sounded so desperate, so human. She grabbed an old rope that had been lying near the well, tied it to a sturdy tree, and lowered the end into the darkness. "Grab on!" she called out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the rope began to tug. Megan's heart raced as she braced herself, pulling with all her strength. The rope was heavy, far heavier than she expected. Whatever was down there was slowly coming up, hand over hand, climbing toward the surface. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold, and the wind began to howl through the trees. Megan shivered, her breath visible in the sudden chill. As the weight on the rope grew heavier, she gritted her teeth and kept pulling, though her arms were aching. And then, something came into view. A hand, long, thin, and dark, like a shadow made flesh, grasped the edge of the well. Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. The hand was wrong. It wasn't human. It was twisted and gnarled, the fingers too long, the nails sharp like claws. Before she could react, the creature pulled itself up and out of the well. It was a shadow, but solid, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. Its face was a void, featureless, except for two glowing eyes that burned with an unnatural light. It stood before her, towering over her, its presence suffocating. The air around them seemed to hum with a dark energy, and Megan felt her legs turn to jelly. She stumbled backward, her mind screaming at her to run, but her body was frozen in place. "Thank you," the creature whispered, its voice a twisted parody of the one she had heard before. "You have freed me." Megan's throat tightened as terror overwhelmed her. She turned to flee, but the creature was faster. It moved like a wisp of smoke, wrapping around her before she could take another step. Cold fingers closed around her wrist, and she screamed as the shadow's grip tightened. "Now, you will take my place." With those words, the world around Megan seemed to tilt. The trees, the ground, the sky, they all faded into darkness, and she felt herself being pulled, dragged down into the well's endless depths. She clawed at the earth, screamed for help, but it was no use. The shadow was relentless, pulling her into the cold, suffocating darkness below. The last thing she saw before the well swallowed her whole was the creature, now free, standing in the moonlight. It looked down at her with glowing eyes, its twisted grin the only thing visible in the dark. And then she was gone. The villagers noticed Megan's disappearance a few days later. They searched the woods, the fields, and even the well, but there was no sign of her. The well remained as it always had, quiet and forgotten, with no clues to her fate. But sometimes, on cold, still nights, if you stand near the well, you might hear a voice, faint and distant, barely more than a whisper. "Help. Me." But no one dares to look into the well. Not anymore.